Hello and welcome to this edition of Iron Sports, and I am Jermaine Brown. In this edition, Fit or Unfit, we explore the recent omission of two of the West Indies' leading batsmen for their tour of Sri Lanka. The Western Relays also come up with its usual flair, but at a different venue. As usual, let us know what you think by heading to our Facebook page, Iron Sports JA. We take a break, but stick around. When we come back, we're going to be heading to the sticky wicket. Soon come. Right then, welcome back to Iron Sports. The surprise omission of Shimron Hetmyer and Evan Lewis from the West Indies ODI squad to tour Sri Lanka has caught the eyes of many. Of course, it has been said that both failed to meet the minimum fitness requirement, which was recently implemented. Both, of course, they took part and they just concluded a series against Ireland 2 weeks ago. They looked fit then. So what has happened over the last 2 weeks? Well, here to discuss this and more is head of Cricket West Indies medical panel, Dr. Akshay Mensing. Dr. Mensing, good to have you with us.
Thanks for
as
having
always. Me. Shimron Hetmyer and Evan Lewis left out of the West Indies ODI squad to tour Sri Lanka. Has come as a surprise to many. Fitness has been underlined as the main reason for them being omitted. All right, let's begin with Hetmyer. Has been inconsistent with his performances, and you know, it has been said it's time for him to get his act together, string together some consistent performances. That would have sounded like more the reason for him being dropped than fitness, because from just looking at things, he looks good out there running up and down and looks fit enough to tour with the team. But you are head of the Cricket West Indies medical panel. Shimron Hetmyer, is he unfit, or how unfit is he?
Well, put it this way, there are tests of fitness that are done, and these are contractual obligations by a player.
Yes.
So it's not just Hetmyer, Lewis, all of them. And this is from a franchise level going straight up to the elite level. They're tested twice a year. And there's some minimum standards, which are being reviewed, by the way, so we can discuss that right now. But
right.
As they stand right now, there's some minimum standards to which you've got to achieve.
Yeah, what are those standards?
Well, right now, what is tested, and it's bizarre why it's only just one test, is what's called the yo-yo test, which is an endurance test. It's a test that sees how long your stamina, basically, how long you can last. And there's a pass mark of 40, which has been sort of constructed over the years. And I will tell you that's under review, because it can't just be one test, and so it has to be a battery that one is looking at. Right. And I'll tell you about the implementation of that as well. But as it is right now, and it's not something new, there's a contractual obligation signed off by the players, signed off by WIPA, signed off by the board, that players have to have a certain level of fitness. Now, they're tested twice a year. In this case, the last test was a few weeks ago. And as soon as the results came out, it's quite straightforward. If there are certain levels that are not met, there are monetary fines that they've had in the past. If it's other levels are not met, you simply are ineligible to play for the next series. This is not unique to West Indies cricket. This happens in every single cricket team where we have a sporting team.
So is it a matter of that policy now being policed more than it once was, or
well, I think there's a bit more emphasis on it. And as I said, you see, in the last few series that the West Indies lost, one common theme that has come out from the coaches' reports has been that the players are not fit enough. So that's number one. Number two, it being part of the contract is just there. So in this case, it just so happens that the testing was done. The next series is Sri Lanka. So they have to miss that until they can get the remedial test done. But there are two things that are obligatory. One is, of course, your fitness testing. The other is your whereabouts for anti-doping.
Right.
Now, if you don't pass the anti-doping whereabouts, in other words, if you're found guilty, it doesn't matter what form you're in, you simply are banned from the sport. This is not just cricket. Likewise, when you have a contract which says that you have to have a certain level of fitness, that is something that you're expected to achieve. And it's not a very high level, might I add.
Right.
So obviously, there's been some slippage. There's been some You know, the players have dropped a bit. And what it is, and you may have heard yesterday that it's being said that when they'll be retested within the next few weeks, if they attain where they're supposed to be, then they'll be eligible as close as the ODI series, sorry, the T20 series in Sri Lanka itself.
Yeah. All right. Evan Lewis has had his issues with injuries. Has been said that he also failed to meet the minimum requirement to pass the yo-yo test. But are there any injury concerns where Lewis
there are no major
stands?
injury concerns as far as I'm aware for selection.
Yeah.
What is known is that lack of fitness does affect your rate of getting injured as well. Did I say infection? I meant injury. But the lack of fitness does affect your ability to get, or your propensity to get injured.
Right.
So if you want to tie those two things together, that's the only correlation. But to say that that's directly a cause here, I don't believe so from the press reports.
Let's break down the yo-yo test a bit and to see where both could have failed to meet it. In terms of when the test is being carried out, what is the exact procedure?
So what happens in a yo-yo test is there's a distance of 20 meters that you have to run. And it's a time test so that it starts very slowly. So you can literally walk the 20 meters and you stop and you come back. And then the beep goes again and you go, and it goes faster and faster and faster. These are validated tests whereby the level you reach determines how much oxygen is being carried by your blood, the VO2 max, and how it is compared to your body and where it should be and so on. Now, as I said, you know, the first 10 levels are very, very easy to do, and just about anybody who can walk can do them. But then it gets progressively more and more. So what you're doing is not testing one distance, but cumulative running at a quicker pace until you can't take it anymore.
Right.
And there's a minimum standard of 40, which is the number that's been given.
Right.
And as you would have heard, in fact, I'd say 90% of the first-class cricketers in the Caribbean have gone above that level. There's some notable exceptions of two of which you just mentioned right now. Now, one of the things that we'll argue is that why is it just one test? And it never was just one test. Because fitness is a matter of strength, power, endurance, flexibility, anaerobic, which means how fast you can sprint, aerobic, which means how much you can endure. So there are many aspects to it. And certainly in the past, all of them were tested. It's somehow dwindled down to this one figure, which is a yo-yo test, and suddenly everybody's talking about the yo-yo results. And what's being implemented now is that they're actually looking at all these parameters, giving each one a weightage, and giving you a score. So that if you're weak on, say, yo-yo, you can catch up on something else, and there's a composite score. That has been worked out already. It's been discussed with WIPO.
Right.
It will be implemented as soon as it's signed off on probably the next contract cycle. But it's being implemented already in terms of testing, so that the players are getting used to it.
Yeah. When you say 40, is it an actual recording?
So you actually, it's actually level, you do the first shuttle, it's 1. You do the second shuttle, it's 2. And it's up to 40 times that you run this distance.
Oh, 40 reps.
But it gets quicker and quicker and quicker.
Okay.
And the difference between this and the beep test is that the beep test was a continuous test where you ran back, and it's got quicker and quicker. This one, you run, you stop, you walk back. You run, you stop, you walk back.
Okay.
So it's almost like bowling, where you run and then you come back to your run-up and so on, but it gets quicker and quicker.
In track and field, it will be called continuous running.
So that's a beep test now, as opposed to the yo-yo test. Which is,
are there any conditionalities when it comes on to passing the test for the players?
Yeah. A lot of factors are taken into place. There's the 40 that we mentioned is the benchmark. That's what you have to pass. But there are obviously many things you take into consideration. Has the player been injured?
Right.
Can the player get to 40? Because there's some players who just simply cannot do so. So what you do is you get their baseline, and then you work off of that.
Right.
So there will be players who may have, for example, knee conditions. We say, okay, you cannot do the yo-yo test. You will do a cycle test instead. Or there's some players who honestly cannot run 40. And say, okay, well, what is your baseline over the last few years? And then you'll be judged off of that. So clearly, when we say 40, that's for the sort of average individual. But it'll be tailored. And it'll be tailored to your workloads. It'll be tailored to a variety of things.
Yeah. Many persons across the Caribbean would point to one of the newest members of the test team in Raheem Cornwall and say, has Raheem Cornwall passed this yo-yo test compared to what Hetmeyer has done and what Lewis has done on the same test?
Well, you see, that's going to the point I made earlier, that you can't base it off of one test alone. Because I did mention that there are many people who cannot achieve a certain standard.
Right.
And that's why what we're going to be doing within this calendar year is actually having 5 or 6 tests, of which you have to get a certain score. And so if you go weak on one, you can catch up on something else. But to answer you, as I said, there are many people who cannot achieve that level, but what we're looking for is a baseline and improvement on that.
Right.
And that would include many other players that you could think of.
Based on some of the results you've seen from these fitness tests over the years, who are some of the fitter players, you'd say, that the team would hold as examples and that other players could look to work out with, train with, ensure they keep their fitness?
I wouldn't want to mention names. What I'd like to say, as I told you, about 90% of the players are above the threshold.
Right.
And an increasing number of players in every franchise are at the higher level of fitness, or, where they really achieve high scores. I don't want to call names for two reasons. One, because it's unfair if you're just looking at the yo-yo test alone, because somebody could be super in that but can't jump more than 6 inches. And the other thing, of course, is that that's their own personal sort of data, which we can talk in general, but I don't want to be pointing out names per se.
All right. When taking into consideration now the other test-playing nations or the other international teams, the standard that we're using for the yo-yo test, is it an international standard? Is it something that the other teams use as well to test their players, or is it something that just is used here just with the West Indies?
So as I said, that the figures that we talk about are correlated to a certain blood level of oxygen carrying capacity. Every test has their standards. You'll be surprised how many people don't want to share them. But what's interesting is with franchise cricket, where they go into various franchises and get tested, you get an idea.
Right.
I do know of 2 of the top playing nations who have much higher standards. So I know of countries which have standards up to 50 as being the acceptable.
Wow.
And the other countries, I say, don't just focus on one test, they will focus on a battery. But generally speaking, 40 is probably average. But certainly there's some countries that have a much higher minimum standard.
Which countries are those?
Well, I know, for example, the English Cricket Board has a higher scoring set of players. As I said, a lot of people don't share that data, so I can't call all the names because I don't have that figure in front of me. But certainly for that one, that's published data, and you can see it.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Going back to these 2 players, and particularly in Sherman Hetmyer, where his performances have been inconsistent over the past year, and even the lead selector, Roger Harper, said in explaining his omission that he looked as if he was finally putting his act together. That's quoting from him, putting his act together. So could the real reason be performance-related, more so than fitness-related, as far as Hetmyer is
Well,
concerned?
as you know, we have a selection panel now, and part of that panel is, apart from the selectors, an analyst who feeds them all the data. So if it were a cricketing issue, I'd expect that it's the same chairman or selector who would be the one who'd come out and say, well, this is the issue. So, obviously the fact that he didn't say that. And as you said, Hetmyer's had an up and down year, but the latter few games that he played certainly looked much better. Don't think that this is, punishment for the next year or the next time they're tested in 6 months. So obviously, it's not going to be that far away. They get a chance for remedial testing.
Yes.
Now, if they fail that, that's trouble then, because now you're probably going to be out until you can get back to that level.
And I hear the retesting could be done before the T20 part of the series.
Yes, it depends on how they're progressing. They're not in isolation. They work with trainers.
Right.
The franchises test them, and whenever, I would assume that within 4 to 6 weeks is the general period when retesting is done. That's when it will be done.
All right. What is the status quo as far as the players making it their personal responsibility to keep fit? Let's say, Hetmyer and Lewis now, not in the team, to ensure that they do the necessary work whilst away from the team. Who monitors that? What system is in place?
Well, every franchise, as you know, has a strength and conditioning person who's in charge. Then there's the head of sports science, Dr. Oba Gulston, at the board level, who looks after the contracted players. He's literally in contact with them almost on a daily basis when it comes to monitoring what's happening. So you can't say there's no monitoring. You can't say that not provided facilities to train. And when we say that, let's work it out in 2 things. As a doctor, I'm obliged to have a certain amount of medical education per year. My employers don't go and say, well, here's where you get your medical education, here where it is. At the most, they may give me resources to attain it, but the responsibility is mine.
Right.
So in a sense, you can look at it that way too, that you can take them to, this is where you can get your fitness, you can appoint them people, but in the end, they also have to play their part.
Right.
But the monitoring is very, very tight. So if they don't go, people will know within a few days.
Right.
However, nobody's going to force anybody to do anything.
Right.
They will be given a program. They'll be given where they can follow that program, and obviously they'll be asked where they're going to. So all I'm just trying to say is that don't think it's going to be spoon-fed fully,
Right.
but nonetheless provisions will be made.
Last ball of the innings now. The Sri Lankan tour comes up. We did well against Ireland recently. How do you see that's limited?
Well, I'd like to go back one more and say we did well against India. I think we should have won that T20 competition. We played very well.
Yeah.
That to me is a bit,
as well,
bit more important because Ireland, as important as it is not as highly placed as India.
Right.
You also get the feeling that the team is playing slightly differently as well. On the other hand, Sri Lanka perhaps is going through their phase of a dip.
Right.
And so I see this as being keenly contested. In the past, going to Sri Lanka was not always keenly contested. They tended to have the upper hand. I think now you're going to see a much better competition.
Think we can come away with a series win in either format?
I think at this stage, the West Indies is capable of doing that anywhere. And in Sri Lanka, it's probably more likely than it would have been in India, where they should have done it. So the answer is yes.
ODI or the T20?
You know, for right now, I think the ODI is playing a bit better than the T20. I think the T20 has a bit of sorting out to do.
Right.
But the ODI team looks like they want to bat 50 overs. The bowlers look like they're able to keep the balls in the right place.
Right.
The fielding still perhaps could be tightened a bit, but I think ODI is looking a bit stronger right now than T20.
Dr. Akram Singh,
thanks for having me.
Head of the Cricket West Indies medical panel. Thanks for joining us. All right, we take a break, and when we come back, we're going to be looking at some track and field. Soon come.